In this podcast episode, Tucker Carlson speaks with Steve Bannon to discuss the current political and geopolitical crises facing the United States, focusing on the implications of Israel's escalating conflict with Iran and how it threatens the fragile coalition underpinning the MAGA movement. The dialogue delves deeply into the internal struggles within the American political and intelligence apparatus, the erosion of national sovereignty, and the existential challenges confronting the Trump coalition and the broader American republic. Bannon opens by reflecting on Donald Trump's 2016 election victory, which he attributes to the creation of an unprecedented coalition that transcended traditional political divides. This coalition united disparate groups, ranging from economic nationalists and populists to tech workers and hardworking Hispanics, around three core planks: ending the forever wars, securing the border and deporting illegal immigrants, and renegotiating trade deals to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. Bannon emphasizes that this coalition is the defining political reality in the U.S. today, yet it is under severe threat, particularly due to the renewed push for military engagement in the Middle East. He argues that the forever wars plank is the most fiercely opposed by the entrenched establishment, which is desperate to maintain America's imperial military presence abroad, especially in the Middle East. Bannon, a staunch supporter of Israel, warns that the current trajectory toward war with Iran could not only shatter the coalition, but also undermine the critical domestic agenda of mass deportations, which he views as essential to preserving American sovereignty. He paints a grim picture of potential civil unrest in major cities if immigration enforcement fails, underscoring the urgency of backing President Trump's efforts. A significant portion of the discussion centers on the so-called deep state, the entrenched intelligence, military, and bureaucratic institutions that Bannon describes as operating with near autonomy from elected leadership. He laments the lack of civilian control over agencies like the CIA, FBI, Department of Justice, and the Pentagon, highlighting how these entities have their own agendas, often aligned with Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and foreign interests, including the Chinese Communist Party. Bannon recounts how these agencies have resisted Trump's agenda, particularly his efforts to end endless wars and enforce immigration laws. He notes the severe understaffing of loyalists within these agencies and the systematic removal of personnel who support Trump's policies. The deep state, he asserts, functions like a Praetorian Guard, wielding immense power and effectively controlling national security policy regardless of the president's intentions. He draws parallels to historical moments when dissenters or opponents of war were jailed during times of conflict, suggesting that America is on the brink of a similar internal confrontation. Bannon expresses concern that if the deep state is not confronted and dismantled, the country risks losing its constitutional republic status and descending into chaos or authoritarianism. The conversation turns to the immediate geopolitical crisis, the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Bannon reveals his frustration and confusion over how the U.S. has been inexorably drawn into a potential shooting war with Iran, likening the situation to the lead-up to the Iraq War, where decisions were made organically and without clear public debate or accountability. He critiques the shifting Israeli narrative, from an urgent need to strike Iran's nuclear program to a broader regime change strategy, and the increasing reliance on American military assets to support Israeli operations. Bannon questions the intelligence justifying these moves, citing statements from former officials like Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe that no credible Iranian nuclear weapons program currently exists. Bannon warns that the U.S. is dangerously close to becoming a direct combatant in a conflict that could last a decade and result in casualties surpassing those of World War II. He stresses that President Trump's vision is to de-escalate and negotiate peace, both in the Middle East and Ukraine, but that the deep state and many establishment figures are actively sabotaging these efforts, pushing the country toward a broader Third World War. Bannon discusses the chaotic and often contradictory political landscape within the Republican Party and the broader conservative movement. He highlights the mad scramble among politicians and media figures to claim the MAGA mantle, even as many secretly oppose Trump's agenda. He points to figures like Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, who publicly support aggressive foreign policies and secrecy but undermine Trump's peace initiatives. The role of media, particularly Fox News, is scrutinized as part of a propaganda apparatus that often supports the deep state's agenda rather than the populist nationalist movement. Bannon recounts how Fox News and other outlets have been complicit in promoting narratives that justify endless wars and suppress honest debate about immigration and trade. He also touches on the suppression of dissenting voices on platforms like YouTube, lamenting the censorship of shows that challenge the establishment narrative and urging viewers to seek alternative sources of information. A core theme throughout the discussion is the crisis of American sovereignty, especially as it relates to immigration. Bannon argues that mass illegal immigration has devastated wages, communities, and the social fabric of the country. He insists that deporting millions of illegal immigrants is not only necessary, but central to restoring the nation's economic and political health. He criticizes the federal government's ambivalence and bureaucratic inertia in enforcing immigration laws, blaming the administrative state for maintaining outdated and ineffective practices. Bannon praises figures like Stephen Miller and others who push for aggressive enforcement, but acknowledges the uphill battle against entrenched interests in agriculture, business, and politics that benefit from cheap labor. Bannon draws a stark comparison between the current sanctuary city movement and the secessionist attitudes that led to the Civil War, labeling governors like Gavin Newsom as neo-Confederates who openly defy federal authority. He calls for a decisive federal response, including the use of federalized National Guard troops, if necessary, to enforce immigration laws and preserve the Union. Toward the end of the conversation, Bannon reflects on the ideological battles within the conservative movement, particularly the tension between populist nationalism and neoliberal neoconservatism. He recounts early debates with figures like Mark Levin over terminology, emphasizing that Trump's movement is rooted in putting America and American citizens first, a principle that many in the establishment find offensive or threatening. Bannon explains that this divide is not merely semantic, but reflects fundamentally different visions for the country's future. He criticizes the Republican Party as controlled opposition that resists the core tenets of Trumpism, border security, fair trade, and ending endless wars, and instead serves the interests of Wall Street, big tech, and the military-industrial complex. Throughout the discussion, Bannon issues a clarion call for immediate and decisive action to confront the deep state and preserve the Trump coalition. He stresses that the next 200 days are critical, warning that failure to act now will result in the permanent loss of the movement's gains and possibly the republic itself. He advocates for a throwdown against the entrenched bureaucracies, naming names, exposing corruption, and mobilizing loyalists within the government to wrest control from the shadowy forces undermining democracy. Bannon expresses hope that with the right leadership and support, including from figures like Tucker Carlson and others, the movement can prevail. The conversation closes on a somber note, acknowledging the spiritual and existential nature of the struggle facing America. Bannon underscores the gravity of the moment, the darkness enveloping the nation's capital, and the necessity of fighting not just political battles, but a profound war for the soul of the country.